Karoline Leavitt confronts a rude talk show host. When is a leader truly tested? When defending their power or when backed into a corner? The studio was silent. Overhead spotlights cast a sharp glow on the stage, reflecting off the polished surface of the table. The audience hushed, their whispers fading into anticipation. Cameras swiveled. The red light flicked on. On one side of the table, Karoline Leavitt sat poised, her back straight, eyes locked in focus. She carried the patience of a warrior. Across from her, Elliot Graves drummed his fingers lightly on the desk, his smirk dripping with condescension. His gaze was sharp, his voice sharpened to cut. For a few seconds, an uncomfortable silence filled the room. Then, Graves leaned forward slightly, his tone laced with mockery as he struck first. Elliot Graves, with a smirk. Karoline, you're here to prove that you're a strong leader. But let's be honest, you're too young, inexperienced. Should the American people really take you seriously? A ripple of movement ran through the audience. Some nodded, others rolled their eyes. Graves had thrown the first punch. Karoline Leavitt, calm, steady. Elliot, George Washington led troops into battle at 21. James Madison was one of the key architects of the Constitution at 29. Do we remember great leaders for their age or for their vision? Scattered applause came from the back rows. Graves' eyes narrowed slightly. His first attack had failed to shake her, but he was just getting started. Elliot Graves, smiling but voice tightening. Nice history lesson, but today's America is different. Leadership isn't just about making appearances. The media has built you up and sold people on the idea that you're a leader. But are you really? Or are you just a product of publicity? A murmur spread through the audience. Some leaned forward, waiting for her response. Graves wasn't just questioning her credentials, he was attacking her legitimacy. Karoline Leavitt, sharp, unwavering. Elliot, if being on television makes someone a leader, then tell me, are you just a talking head? The room shifted. Laughter rippled through the audience. A few clapped. Graves' smug expression flickered. The host tightened his grip on his cue cards. His first strategy had failed, but he wasn't about to give up. As he picked his next question, a devilish grin crept onto his face. Elliot Graves' smirk faded. Karoline's responses were sharper than he had expected. He leaned forward slightly, recalibrating his next strike. Elliot Graves, mocking tone. Karoline, you're good with words, I'll give you that. But that's all they are. Words. You became popular because you're young, conservative, and controversial. But is this attention really about your ideas? A murmur ran through the audience. Graves was trying to dismiss Karoline's success as a mere product of media hype, playing to the crowd's skepticism. Karoline Leavitt, cool, unwavering. Elliot, when liberal figures rise, you call it progress. But when a conservative woman gains traction, suddenly it's media manipulation. Scattered applause erupted from the audience. Graves' lips pressed into a thin line. Elliot Graves, raising an eyebrow, voice sharpening. The policies you support roll back women's rights. You're backing an ideology that restricts women. Can you defend that? Karoline Leavitt, with a slight smile. Isn't it ironic that a man trying to silence me is also trying to lecture me on women's rights? Do you really care about women's rights, Elliot? Or just the women who agree with you? A beat of silence filled the studio. Graves' jaw tightened. Elliot Graves, leaning in, voice icy. Conservative values were the same 50 years ago, but the world has changed. Politicians like you are stuck in the past. Do you really believe you represent the future? Karoline Leavitt, steady, clear. Elliot, a tree without roots can't withstand a storm. Change doesn't require erasing the past. So tell me, does the future belong to the media's definition of progress or to the American people? From the back of the audience, a few people clapped. Graves glanced down at his cue cards, but for the first time, they didn't offer him an escape route. Elliot Graves was losing his patience. Every response Karoline gave deflected his attacks, pulling the audience further onto her side. The rules of this game had to change. Soft jabs weren't enough anymore. He needed to hit harder, brutally if necessary. Elliot Graves, raising his voice, eyes narrowing. "You talk a big game, Karoline, but the truth is people like you only create division. Hasn't your political career done more to divide this country than unite it?" A murmur rippled through the audience. Graves was shifting the narrative, trying to corner her as a symbol of national division. Karoline Leavitt, calm but firm. "Elliot, it's not ideas that divide America. It's the silencing of ideas. I don't tell people what to think, but people like you only allow certain voices to be heard." Applause broke out. Graves clenched his teeth, though he kept his composure. This woman wasn't rattling. Elliot Graves, struggling to keep his anger in check, voice cutting. "But let's be honest. You exclude certain groups with the policies you support. Do you really stand for freedom, or just the freedom of your supporters?" Karoline Leavitt, locking eyes with Graves, voice steady as steel. "If freedom only applies to the people you approve of, then it's not freedom at all. I believe in everyone's right to speak. But you? You believe in silencing those who disagree with you. So tell me, Elliot, who really represents democracy here?" Scattered cheers erupted from the audience. Graves' face reddened. This was no longer just an interview. It was a battle. But he wasn't done yet. His final move was coming, and this time he was aiming to break her. Elliot Graves' frustration was written all over his face. Karoline's responses had backed him into a corner, and for the first time he was losing control. He gripped the cue cards tightly, but this time he didn't look at them. He had realized something. He wasn't going to win this by playing fair. His only chance now was to catch Karoline off guard. Elliot Graves, forcing a smirk, voice laced with mockery. "So, tell me, Karoline, do you really think you're this perfect? You present yourself as strong, fair, always on the right side, but everyone has a weak spot. Isn't the biggest lie of all pretending you've never made a mistake?" A hush fell over the studio. This was his last hope. If he could make her stumble, even for a second, he could regain control. But Karoline didn't flinch. Her expression remained steady as she met his gaze. She took a measured breath before responding. Karoline Leavitt, calm but firm as steel. "Elliot, I've never claimed to be perfect, but being imperfect doesn't mean I stop standing for what's right. The real question is, isn't pretending you've never been wrong the biggest lie of all?" The room erupted in applause. Graves' brows furrowed. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time, it was obvious, he was out of moves. Elliot Graves, smiling tightly, growing desperate. "That's just clever wordplay, Karoline. People like you dodge accountability. So tell me, are you just another politician? Do your actions actually match your words?" Karoline Leavitt, narrowing her eyes, voice sharp and precise. "My words and my actions align, Elliot. But the real question is, does anything you've said in this interview align with what you actually believe?" From the back of the room, cheers broke out. This was no longer just a debate, it was a defining moment. Graves stared blankly for a moment. He glanced at his cue cards, but they were useless now. This interview was no longer his to control. Elliot Graves' tension was no longer something he could mask. At the start, he had full control, but now he looked like a man grasping for answers and not finding them. This interview had been planned as a takedown of Karoline, but now the audience wasn't applauding him. They were cheering her. His jaw clenched. He had one last chance, but now it had to get personal. Elliot Graves, his voice cold, laced with restrained anger. "All right, Karoline, let's look at your background. You've lived a privileged life. Most Americans haven't had the advantages you've had. Do you really understand their struggles?" The energy in the room shifted. This was no longer just a political debate, it was a personal attack. Karoline Leavitt, steady, unwavering, her voice slow but deliberate. "Elliot, struggle isn't just about economic hardship. Everyone has their battles. But here's the difference. I don't weaponize mine. I simply stand for the voices others try to silence." A few scattered claps from the back of the room. Graves realized his attack had failed, but he still wasn't giving up. Elliot Graves, speaking quickly now, feeling his grip slipping. "But Karoline, people like you always say the same thing. I'll be the voice for the people, I'll fight for everyone. But then what happens? People get forgotten, promises are broken. So, tell me, what makes you any different? Karoline Leavitt. Her voice like steel, sharp and cutting. The difference, Elliot, is that I stand with the silenced. You stand with those who are allowed to speak. So, tell me, who here actually defends freedom? The room erupted. Graves glanced down at his cards, but there were no words left to save him. For the first time, Elliot Graves felt what he had refused to believe. He had lost. Elliot Graves' hands were now gripping the edge of the desk. His expression was tight, the tension in his face revealing what he refused to admit. He had lost control of the game. This wasn't how the interview was supposed to go. He was supposed to corner Karoline to put her on the defensive, but now it was he who had nowhere left to turn. This was his last chance. Elliot Graves, trying to suppress his frustration, but his voice hardening. Karoline, you speak with confidence. But the truth is, politics has become a performance for people like you. You reach people with words, but can you actually change anything? The air in the studio grew heavier. Graves' final attack was aimed at undermining Karoline's legitimacy, not just as a speaker, but as a force for action. Karoline Leavitt, taking a slow breath, her voice calm but firm. Elliot, if politics is a performance, you would know best. Because right here, at this table, you're not trying to challenge my reality. You're just trying to silence me. But I'm here, and you won't silence me. For a moment, the room was still. Then, applause. Loud, growing, uncontainable. Graves averted his gaze. For the first time, he had no immediate comeback. But he couldn't accept this. His reputation was on the line. He had to land one final blow. Elliot Graves, clenching his jaw, launching one last strike. People might believe in you, Karoline, but history doesn't remember those who just talk, it remembers those who act. So, tell me, how will history remember you? Karoline Leavitt, never breaking eye contact, her voice like steel. I'm not thinking about how history will remember me, Elliot. My question is, how will it remember you? Silence. For the first time, there were no words left. A roar of cheers erupted from the back of the studio. Graves sat motionless. This had been his last move, and now he had nothing left to say. Karoline hadn't just won an argument. She had taken control of the entire narrative. Now the question is for you. Who do you think was right in this debate, Karoline or Graves? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you want more powerful debates like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. A brand new special feature is coming tomorrow. What truly makes a leader strong? Their ideas, their conviction, or their experience? Let us know your thoughts below. God bless America.